Spain versus the UK. Which country is more tax efficient? And the answer might surprise you. In this video, I'm joined by accountant Simon Misiewicz from Optimize Accountants, where we're going to break down the UK and Spanish tax systems, look at some of the similarities, look at some of the differences, and understand some nuances which could mean that you end up paying more tax than you would really owe. So with that said, I hope you enjoy this, guys. Let's get right into it. All right, Simon, welcome back to Millennials for Money. Good to have you back on.
Thank you for having me back. At least I wasn't that bad the first time, so I'm glad to be back.
You were very well received the first time, Simon, so of course I had to get you back and do another video.
Thank you.
Good. Perfect. So, what we're going to cover, obviously, in this video is we're going to go a bit more in depth into the UK versus Spain tax comparison here. We've got some practical examples and key points that we're going to walk through. And this is, so it's not just a theoretical discussion. We're going to have, the way to translate this into, how this might work in real life, which I think is really important as we go through this. So Simon, before we get into our discussion today, if you want to maybe give a reminder of who you are for those who are joining us today or who maybe never seen you before.
Yeah, thank you ever so much, Jonny. So Simon Misiewicz, and that's Simon M, just to stop the complications of trying to understand how you say my god-awful name. So I'm a British accountant, but I'm also a US qualified as well. I've been helping a lot of Americans and Brits move over to Spain, a bit like Jonny. You're in Madrid, my understanding, is that right?
Yep.
Yep. So I'm in the south part. I'm in Andalusia, Marbella in particular. So we both love living in the sun. And it's the issue you always have is taxation. Not just taxation into the home country, for me, UK, but the tax matters that you need to understand in Spain as well. And here I am to talk through those.
Yeah, and as you'll all see as we go through, this can quite different tax systems and treatment and rules. There are similarities, but where it gets different, it can get quite complicated. So in general, Simon, would you say someone who has a very similar lifestyle in the UK and someone with a comparable lifestyle in Spain, who would you say generally pays more tax?
That's a very good question. When I'm asked do you pay more tax in Spain, is a question that I get frequently asked by my clients. And the honest answer is I actually pay less tax in Spain than I do in the UK. And people say, well, that's false. You must be doing something criminal. The thing for me is that I'm not getting employment income or self-employment income in Spain, which is taxed higher, I would say, than the UK. My income is from my UK limited company via dividends. And what's nice about Spain, it has a savers rate, which is very, very low compared to the UK. I know the UK does have a different tax rate for dividends, but Spain is exceptionally low. So you can be quite tax efficient if you structure yourself correctly.
Yeah, particularly in your case, that's something that can work out quite well. But if you take someone like myself, my main source of income is employment. Someone who is at or around my level of income in the UK probably pays less tax than I would in Spain because of the bracket system that we'll see as we go through. Granted, of course, in the UK, you've got other challenges that you're facing, such as a much higher cost of living.
Yeah, which people forget about. Yeah, not that we're going to diversify this conversation, but we did speak about this before this show some time ago, was Dubai. I actually went to Dubai to see if I could live there. The answer was no. And simply because albeit you pay less tax in Dubai, the cost of living was 2 times higher than Spain, if not more. So but people have to be careful of the tax tail wagging the dog. So you're right, Spain is more expensive than the UK, but the cost of living and the quality of life in Spain, I would say, is better than the UK.
Yeah, Spain is higher tax than the UK, but yeah. Yeah, so the way I always look at it is, coming from a finance background, I always think with like a P&L mindset, so even though you might pay more tax in one country, like what is your bottom line looking like? How much of your money are you keeping? Not just when you factor in taxes, but when you factor in things like cost of living, when you think about things like, maybe tax efficient savings or investment products like you have in the UK as well. Because there's so many factors that come into this, and you could, take this down so many different routes.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, the cost of living could be quite different even in Spain or the UK, right? Because you could be sitting in Leeds versus London, and a meal would cost you twice as much in London. You could be in Costa Brava versus where I am in Marbella, and again, the cost difference is huge. So it's a good point that you make, and we'll be talking through these slides, talking about the different regions of Spain, and it's not just the cost of living, but actually the tax across those different regions, which is one of the big issues that you find, is that the UK have one tax system. Well, England, I guess, because there is a difference between Scotland and Wales, but in Spain, I think people come over to Spain and think, okay, the tax system is exactly the same, and yet it's not.
Yeah, it varies very greatly depending on where you are in the country.
Yeah.
Maybe as we've got this on the screen, Simon. So we got tax residence here, and this is maybe one of the first points of difference or divergence between the two tax systems. So we've got the UK. When it comes to the number of days, the general test in both countries, I think you come out at about 183 days, and that's pretty standard. Where you've got differences is number one in the tax year. So you've obviously got a different tax year in the UK as you have in Spain. And you've also got the sufficient ties test in the UK as well, which greatly complicates tax residency for exiting Brits or people who are back and forth between the UK.
Well, let me touch on that, because that's a really important point for anyone moving to Spain and thinking, well, hey, I can see three numbers on there, 30, 90, 183. What does that mean? There is actually another number called 16. So there is an issue whereby you could go to the UK, and if you've got several ties, back to your point, you could go back to the UK on 16, 17 nights and then still be UK tax resident. So you do have to worry about that kind of situation going on. And I see a lot of people make that mistakes where they think, well, I'll go to a country like Spain, but do you know what? I'm going to go back every weekend, see my kids if they're kind of split relationships, or I'm going to see my friends for partying in London or various other things. And they rack up the number of days. And then they get a phone call or a letter from HMRC to say, hey, you owe us a big amount of tax and you need to pay it. And they wonder why. So I always call the 183 day a myth, especially when it comes to the UK, because you could easily be a tax resident in the UK for different types of reasons. You could be working in the UK for 30 odd days, 35 days, be tax resident. You could own a home in the UK, which is your main home or the considered home, and live in it for 30 days, you're still tax resident. So there is huge amount of issues around the tax residency, but Spain is a lot easier. I think it's pretty much 183 days, you're either tax resident or you're not, and that's straightforward.
Yeah. The only thing with Spain, I think, is you've got this caveat where, if you're moving to what they consider a non-cooperative jurisdiction, which they've got a list on the tax agency website. In general, this is a list of countries where Spain either doesn't have a double tax treaty or they consider that they don't meet the criteria for fiscal transparency. Then Spain can consider you a tax resident for up to 5 more years. So the year you leave Spain plus the 4 following tax years, they could consider you
I think Gibraltar's on that list, isn't it?
Gibraltar is on that list. And Gibraltar has the additional complication of that if you're a Spanish citizen, I think they can consider you a tax resident indefinitely as long as you're in Gibraltar. If you're moving directly from Gibraltar to
and I've seen that issue. I've seen that issue where people set up a business in Gibraltar thinking that it's not taxable in Spain, and yet the Spanish tax authorities see straight through that and tax it anyway.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, other countries you've got on that list, you've got like the Channel Islands, you have countries like Bahrain. Yeah, a lot of the smaller islands and tax havens, like the Cayman Islands, I think is on that list as well. Long time ago, you had countries like the UAE, you had Cyprus on there as well, you had Andorra, but these have all been removed over time. And on the republished list, you'll see those countries are no longer on that list.
Yeah, thankfully.
So this is exactly what you were talking about before, Simon, and it's kind of what we were talking about in just before, is regarding double taxation and tax treaties. So understanding that tax residence in one country and income from another country creates this awkward situation, if you like, and this is where things like double tax treaties come in to understand how that gets taxed and who it gets paid to.
Yeah. And one thing to bear in mind is that Spain taxes you on your worldwide income unless you are coming over on the Beckham law, which, again, Beckham law is a misunderstood tax regime. But it typically someone coming over on a work visa to Spain, or not using the Beckham law, or coming over on a non-lucrative visa. Anyone coming over in those situations and got money generated from the UK or any other country for that matter, you do need to bear in mind that there is a tax situation of Spain where they will tax your worldwide income. So you may pay tax in the country where the asset is being generates the income, but you then have to pay tax in Spain, and you get a tax credit in Spain for the foreign taxes paid. In most cases, there are some nuances where actually Spanish tax authorities will tax you first. So you do need to be careful of that. And I'm talking things like pensions and stuff like that. So one of the biggest issues I see is people not understanding that Spain taxes you on worldwide income. Sometimes inadvertently pays tax twice because they didn't check their tax return.
Yeah. It's and it's a classic, yeah, that you have to really pay attention to and be careful with. And it comes into part of your like wider tax planning strategy as well. Particularly if you're being taxed on your worldwide income. And particularly when we think about, who pays more tax, if you look at the percentages there for Spain, they're pretty high, and in percentage terms, probably higher than the UK. But it's not as simple as just looking at that. There's the geographic aspect that comes into it. There's the fact that tax brackets by region can also vary as well. And then you've got the fact, of course, in the UK that, you have a personal allowance, which despite it being much higher in Spain, you lose above a certain amount.
Yeah. Yeah. And one thing that I always like to bring in this point is when people look at this, they'll think, oh, Spain only has 3 bands. No, it hasn't. It has lots more bands. So it does go between 24 and 37%. It's not in between those two numbers. There are bands within bands that goes up. But to be honest, you could easily cover 3 slides just on the number of bands you have. So what you'll notice is, in particular in Spain, is if you start to earn quite a lot of money, your tax percentage ramps up quite quickly, in my view, compared to what the UK does. So in band 1, where you got this 20%, and by the way, there's a 2% percentage extra, and that's the new UK tax legislation that's coming into force, where it will tax you on your rental property and any interest. So there's an extra 2%. So that's why I put those numbers as they are. Now, when you look at those numbers, you think, 22% versus 24, that's not so bad. It's quite close. But actually, it goes in Spain from 24% quite quickly to that 37%. So you do have to be mindful of those bands.
Yeah, absolutely. And coming back to what we were saying about different cost of living around the country, in Spain, you've got different brackets for different regions with different costs of living. Like we take Madrid, Marbella, Barcelona, for example, all have their own regional tax brackets, all with different costs of living. So it's almost like you have to take those two together to determine your, as I said before, net result in Spain. Whereas in the UK, you've got one tax system which, someone in London is naturally going to be on higher income and higher salaries and will quickly go further up that tax bracket. And because of their cost of living, have less money. But someone earning the same we'll take Leeds, for example, like you said. So they're still paying the same amount of tax, but they would, in theory, have a higher net profit or net result because of the lower cost of living.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, we've got that on another slide, Jonny. If you go to the next slide, I'm sure we've got the regional variations. So this is where we talk about those regional variations to say, well, okay, with the UK, you've got kind of a simplest one. You've got England, Scotland, and Wales predominantly have very similar rates. I know Scotland is now charging 50% tax, would you believe? But typically, I would say it's very similar. But as you mentioned, Jonny, you look at those regions. I mean, if you're looking at Valencia, you could go up to 54% in terms of taxation, right? So it's very high. But again, as you alluded to and mentioned, that you do have to think about, well, what about the cost of living in each of these areas? So you might pay a bit more tax, but actually is the cost of living less? I mean, I'm not sure actually, living in Valencia versus Andalusia. I know Andalusia is quite expensive, but are there cheaper areas where you pay more tax? You probably come out of the same net position, as you called it.
Yeah, and particularly Madrid, it's one of the most fiscally advantageous regions of the country, but it's also one of the highest cost of living areas in Spain, probably only beaten by Barcelona and Palma de Mallorca, particularly when you're looking at property prices there as well, which will eat up a big chunk of your budget in Spain as well.
Yeah. In Spain, the one thing I love about the Spanish tax system versus the UK system is that in the UK, you've got income tax, which is applied to self-employment, employment income, and interest and royalties. And we have then one other one called for dividends, so income tax on dividends. But in Spain, you've got the savers rate, which is, for me, is a lot more attractive if you are an investor. So if you're buying stocks, bonds, ETFs, index funds, and you get income from those, actually the tax position in Spain, for me, is better. It's lower tax on those types of income. So one of the things I often say to my clients is, when you're moving countries, sometimes you might get in a position where you say, well, can I change what I do? Can I change my income streams so that I can push out, have a lower tax, and maybe have, as you called it, the net bottom line number being higher than what it normally would be? Because if you're getting any form of dividends in the UK, you can see the percentages at the top there, 39.35% versus 30%. And that 30%, by the way, is what, 300,000 euros? So you're not going to get that until you're significantly high. So, being quite wealthy or aspiring to be wealthy, doing it in Spain can be quite tax beneficial.
Yeah, probably once you've accumulated the wealth and can distribute it out or pay it out, if you could manage it well, like, for example, withdrawing from your pension to the point where you don't push yourself into a higher bracket, you're right that you can effectively pay less tax in Spain in that sense. This is maybe a follow-on question from what we were talking about and brings together the salary and the savings base in Spain versus the UK, particularly if you're a self-employed person or a business owner. Which country do you believe has we could say like the best system or where you pay less tax, but I suppose based on what you were just saying, we could argue like which country has the more flexible system where you can structure your affairs in such a way that you can minimize your tax burden.
I don't think there's much of a difference. You might have a different opinion on that, but when I look at tax structures, I often look at, if you're self-employed, because this is the easiest one, should you have all your income be taxed on you versus using a limited company? And when I did the numbers for both the UK and Spain, I kind of got to the same kind of number where it makes sense once you start generating an income of, let's say, 50, 60,000, and pounds, euros makes no difference. And you get to a stage where you say, well, actually, that 50, 60,000 profit, I only need 30,000 of that, but I'm happy to reinvest the money inside that company to do something else. Then that makes sense to use a company. So Spanish SL, I think the tax rate is 25%, but when you first start it, you get a discounted rate of 15%, which you don't get in the UK, by the way. I have to say that's quite a good incentive. So there is that side of things whereby you can use a company. If you are the type of person who lives life to the max, gets all the income and actually says, no, I want to enjoy my life, and by the way, good for you, then trying to use a company would make no sense in either the UK or Spain, because then you have got double taxation. You've got the company taxation in the UK or Spain, and then when you take the money back out again, by taking all of the money out, you could be in a position whereby you're paying still 45, 50% in Spain, and in the UK it's actually higher. You could be in a position whereby you're paying around about 50, 60% if you're not careful. So it really does depend on your lifestyle. But if you're the type of person who needs money, don't use a company. If you're getting to 50, 60,000 pounds profit and you don't need all that money, you're lucky to invest, maybe a company could work. But I'm not saying it will work. I'm just saying it could work.
Yeah. My conclusion is very similar to yours, is that after a certain threshold in self-employed income, you're going to be paying a lot in personal income tax. You're going to be paying quite high social security, though I think in Spain it is capped at a certain point, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. And then the question is, are you effectively going to be paying less if you have this set up as a limited company versus if you're in your self-employed setup? But yeah, as you said, I think it's a very similar situation in both the UK and Spain.
It kind of sucks when you're an accountant or a tax advisor, because when someone asks you the question like that, it's like, well, we always say it depends. And that saying really does grate me when I hear that. It's like, it depends. Why can't you just tell me the answer? And unfortunately, it just doesn't exist because it really has so many variables. It's like physics, trying to explain what a particle force is versus an atom. It's very difficult.
And on the topic of social security, do you consider Spain's social security system to be more expensive, quote unquote, than the UK national insurance system?
It goes back to the fact of the percentages versus what you do. So employment versus self-employment. Where do the rates go? If you are self-employment, I don't think the rates are that different, if I'm totally honest with you. With the national insurance in the UK, I know they're trying to reduce it quite significantly. So I think they could be quite high in the UK. But I think the difference is, I think it's the administration and the impact of doing quarterly returns in Spain. You've got so much more paperwork. You said about ease. I think at the minute, you've got this whole issue of doing regular reporting in Spain, plus your monthly. That's changing actually in the UK. So in the UK, we have something called making tax digital. So, once you have £50,000 worth of income from self-employment, you've got to do quarterly returns. So we probably are going to see that Spain and the UK for self-employed is probably the similar kind of level of income tax when you take the cost of living into account. And then you ask the question, well, what's the easiest system to use? I think they're all getting very complex, the regular reporting. And the reason for that is because in the UK right now, we don't have to pay any tax on that quarterly return like you do in Spain. You have to do quarterly payments. In the UK, it's just a reporting requirement. So it is different. So when you think about, well, where are you paying the most money? Well, actually, you've got to think about what in Spain you're having to put money into the system every quarter or every month versus the UK where you can wait until a full year. So from a cash flow perspective, I think it can work out better in the UK. But the disaster, of course, is for people that in the UK that don't put money aside for their tax payment and then go, oh God, how am I going to pay that?
Yeah, yeah, I was going to say that. Yeah, even if it is cash flow beneficial, then yeah, this does need to be some planning.
If you invest the money, I think that's where it can be beneficial.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. On the VAT point you mentioned as well, I know it's not related to social security, but one thing worth noting in Spain is that currently there's no threshold for VAT. That means that any sales that you generate as an autonomous or self-employed person are subject to collecting VAT. Now, there is, as I understand, kind of a court case going on between the European Commission and Spain over this because it is an EU directive that's been implemented across the EU in all countries except Spain. And now, I think, finally, the European Commission is taking it up with Spain to try and force the implementation of this VAT threshold.
I was not aware of that, but it's interesting. I didn't talk about VAT, but when I always talk about administration, I was referring to the level of social security payments you got to make and the VAT that you got to do as well. There's a lot of bureaucracy around self-employment, and I'm not blaming that on Spain. I'm just saying this tax system that's currently in place does put a lot of pressure on you, and I would say that using an accountant to do that. I don't do Spanish tax returns, I have to say, but I would always say use an accountant to help you go and do that. Now, interesting enough, maybe this brings us on to a nice situation actually, because I did see one of your videos talking about a system that people can use.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole range of different basically DIY accounting software that you can use. I'll leave the link to the provider that Simon is referring to in the video description in case anyone's interested. Definitely a good service. But there's the traditional like gestores where you can have a person take care of it for you. Or you can have like these online digital DIY services where you'll essentially personally keep track of your accounting, and then on the quarterly basis, the platform will allow you to generate what you need for those returns on a quarterly or monthly basis, depending on the frequency that you need to file. Wealth taxes, Simon. So not something you particularly hear about a lot in the UK, but in
Not
Spain.
Not yet. The Rachel Reeves storm was coming, I'm sure.
Let's hope not. But in Spain, nevertheless, wealth tax is in fact a thing. Although there are a number of regions like Madrid, like Andalusia, as I understand as well, that have essentially given significant exemptions up to, I think, 99% in some cases. So the wealth tax effect is almost negligible for those people who are subject to it. You've also got exemptions on like your primary residence up to 400,000 euros in Spain as well. So there are a number of things that are exempt from that wealth tax, but certainly worth knowing if you are planning to move to Spain, and particularly if you're going to buy, pretty expensive property.
Yeah, and I think the thing about this is, again, it's back to that override around each of the regions. There was one particular area, I'm not sure it was Valencia or Catalan area, where the actual wealth tax was quite harsh. So you do have to be careful where you live in each of these regions. And, I was quite lucky because I landed on my feet with Andalusia, because the tax rates, as you mentioned about Madrid, same for you, is that, they from both wealth taxes and inheritance tax or death taxes are very small in those regions. So, we are quite lucky, but there are some people who are getting hit quite hard on wealth taxes. But, just because you see it in Spain, you think, well, that's a bit hard. Don't think it's not coming into the UK. There was mention in the last budget in the UK about wealth tax, and they brought mansion tax in, which is the first start of wealth taxes. So trust me on this, it will be in the UK at some point in the future. They're just warming people up to this at the minute, so it's going to happen.
Yeah, gotta keep an eye on it. So I think the one you're referring to is Catalonia, particularly when it comes to inheritance tax. I know Catalonia is very punishing when it comes to inheritance tax.
Which you can see at the bottom, right? It's actually there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Very high rates. Yeah, I mean, you see the rates from Madrid as well, but when it comes to like inheritance and donation taxes, particularly when you've got like blood relatives or in some cases like second line like grandparents, there's significant reductions as I mentioned before. So you effectively pay little to no tax. Like you could have, I don't know, like let's make up a number like 20,000 euro donation, and you might end up only paying maybe 50 euros in tax because of the exemption in Madrid.
But do you know what? There's a big thing about the state tax, especially when it comes to Spain, because in the UK, people will be used to the fact that if you pass away, your estate, as in you who have passed away, will pay the inheritance tax. But in Spain, it's the role reversal. So it's the actual beneficiary receiving those assets that will pay estate tax. So you could have a parent that dies in the UK, gives you the assets in Spain, and all of a sudden you could have the estate tax. You have to be really careful with this. And people, I have several calls with people saying, I've just joined, I've just come to live in Spain, and my parents, well, one of my parents has just died. And I was thinking, crikey, it's bad timing. A, because your parent have died. I mean, that's never nice. And you're in a different country, so you might not have been there at the time. In addition to that, you've now got this huge problem of estate tax that you've got to worry about. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I understand from reading online as well, there's a bit of a difference in the process of handling one's estate when someone passes away as well. In Spain, it's almost like everything happens very quickly, particularly, even things like the funeral and then kind of the settlement and who gets what. It all kind of happens fairly quickly, whereas in the UK, that can be a pretty drawn out process. It takes time. And so if you've got a UK asset that's still in that slow process, but I've heard people who've had that scenario and then they can't effectively declare the inheritance to Spain, who are asking them for it because they don't have what they need to be able to declare it.
Well, assets can go into probate in the UK, which can take up to 3 to 6 years. I've seen cases where it goes that long. I think the big thing for me is when you in the UK, when you pass away, typically it will go to your spouse, right? Husband and wife scenario. In Spain, it doesn't. It actually goes down. It goes 50% to your spouse and then 50% down to the child, which actually can cause a lot of problems. But there is a European ruling, another European ruling, whereby you can say, I want the Spanish law to follow my UK will. So you could say, well, actually, I still want my assets to go to my husband, my wife, my civil partner before it goes to my children. So if you haven't got a will, or you've not done that kind of advice, please do, because people, even if you're young, you never know, right? What might happen. And you're right, it's quite complex. You do need to sit down with someone and make sure that your assets go to the people you want. And you can do that by you following the UK will regulations.
Yeah, I remember hearing that as well. It's kind of like a redirection of the Spanish will.
Yeah, it was a complex tax case that was many, many years ago. But someone, I think, the assets in Spain, it went down. I think they were Danish, if I remember. Certainly in Scandinavia area. And they said, no, I'm taking this to the European court. And yeah, funny enough, they won. And the assets went where they wanted it to.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I feel like I may have read about that once before. But yeah, very interesting case, yeah.
It's definitely one to put you to sleep at night if you're struggling. So do read it.
Oh, keep me awake all night. I want to talk now about maybe a less morbid version of this, which is, if you're selling a home in the UK, maybe selling a house, packing up and moving to Spain, for example. There's a lot of things around, capital gains tax. Where do you pay it? How much do you pay? Time in the sale of that as well can influence that. So maybe that's something that is worth discussing here.
Yeah. And this is quite timely because I had a client who said, well, I'm going to come to Spain for a couple of years. So I'm not going to buying and rent. And I said, oh, great. What have you done with your home? He said, well, I sold it whilst I was in Spain. So first year I stayed in Spain. I then sold my house in the UK. But I was okay because I was covered by something called private residency relief, which in the UK, that means you get your full allowance fully paid for and you don't pay any capital gains tax. What they were blindly unaware of is that you don't get home allowance in Spain. So unless you reach a certain age, I think retirement age. But what will happen is that what the Spanish authority will say was, what was the gain and what did you reinvest in Spain? So even though the asset was in the UK, this person inadvertently struck up a huge Spanish tax bill because they didn't get the same release. So you have to be very careful because, again, that's my point, that the Spanish tax authorities will tax you on your worldwide income.
Yeah. And am I right in saying that if this client had purchased a property in Spain, they could have avoided that tax bill as well?
Totally. Yeah. And that's the point is, if you get the gain, you reinvest all of that money into a Spanish property, then there would not be this issue. So back to the point of they came over for the sole purpose of renting to see if they enjoyed it or not. After that tax bill, I kind of think they didn't like it.
Unsurprising, yeah. And there's a timeline on that as well. I don't think it has to necessarily be in the same tax year, but I think it is maybe within 2 to 3 years of the sale, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think 2 years, if I remember rightly on that. It could be 3, but I'm sure I read 2. But yeah, you can do things, but they obviously didn't want to do that. And I think it was too far gone anyway. But yeah, you have to be careful. One thing I would say about assets is sometimes it's a good idea to sell an asset while you're still in the UK and then move to Spain with the cash. Sometimes it's better to sell an asset when you leave the UK and move to Spain. Let me give you an idea of that. If you've got stocks and shares and then you move to Spain, you may, and I'm saying may, you may actually pay less tax in Spain by selling stocks and shares when you get here rather than what you would have paid tax in the UK. And the reason for that is because when you sell stocks and shares when you've left the UK, you don't pay any capital gains tax in the UK, provided, and there is a nuance here, provided that you don't go back to the UK within 5 years. So as long as you kind of stay in Spain for 5 years, you do not need to pay capital gains tax in the UK. So again, the Spanish tax may actually be lower than the tax that you might pay in the UK.
Okay, that's interesting. Maybe the exception to that is assets within an ISA, perhaps, because from my own personal circumstance, I understand that, Spain doesn't recognize the ISA. So coming back to what we were saying about double taxation, yes, the UK considers anything within an ISA tax exempt, but Spain doesn't, and so you'd have to pay the corresponding tax on there. But if you're not Spanish tax resident for that year that you're moving or relocating or whatever, maybe that's a good time to sell or clean out. Obviously, we talked about it in the past video as well. It really depends on the circumstances, the person, etc.
But clearing out your ISA when you're in the UK makes sense, right? And that's what I was saying. Sometimes it makes sense to sell the asset when you're in the UK, bring the cash to Spain. Sometimes it's more beneficial to do it the other way around. Funny enough, I was on a show talking about US UK taxes, but it applies the same in Spain. There is a nice, interesting dynamic called the tax holiday. And what I mean by that is, and I've done this myself, funny enough. So I was leaving the UK to come to Spain, but I indirectly stayed in the US for maybe 3 months. So what I did was I sold some of my assets whilst I was out of the UK, split year treatment. I'm not going back to the UK, so therefore not tax resident. Eventually we'll go to Spain, but I actually went to the US because I wasn't too sure if I was coming to Spain for long term or stay in the US long term. So I sold these assets, no UK capital gains tax. In fact, no capital gains tax anywhere. And then once I've got that money, I then moved to Spain. Once I came tax resident, no issue because I've already sold those shares. So the tax holiday is a very nifty way of, you're not breaking any laws. You're just using the tax treaty to its benefit to find out where are you tax resident. You have to watch out for tiebreaker rules, I have to say. But as long as you time it right, you can easily use this tax holiday to your benefit.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, very interesting. And thanks for sharing your personal experience there. So to bring this all together, Simon, and to kind of wrap up our discussion, how should someone look at things based on their lifestyle, their income, the assets they have, to decide which country is more tax optimal for them?
That's an interesting question, isn't it? To which country, and I have this a lot, where clients will say to me, which country should I live in to be tax efficient? And I go back to my comment earlier, is Dubai was a very tax efficient country, but I chose not to live in Dubai for many reasons, cost of living being one of them. So one thing I would say is never let the tax tail wag the dog. So never make a decision based on your life that you're going to be living 365 days, for hopefully many years, based on a tax regime. So Dubai currently is obviously 0% tax, but they have introduced corporation tax. There is now suggestions that they will bring in income tax, albeit low, but they will bring it in. Tax changes ultimately. So never gamble on a tax system, but equally, Dubai wasn't great for myself or for Louise. And even my son, Hugo, didn't really enjoy it. So, just because we could have been tax efficient doesn't mean that we should live there. Spain is great. We pay tax, great. But we get with the sunshine, we have the better quality food. The people are nicer than the UK. Sorry, UK Brits. But generally they are. And we enjoy it. So the fact that you pay more tax, I would say what you need to do is structure your finances in a way that minimizes your tax, no matter where you live. You might stay in the country you're living in. You might be looking to go different countries, but you may stay where you are. That doesn't mean you shouldn't look at your finances and say, right, how do we become more tax efficient? How do we invest better? And that for me is probably my end gambit.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, and I think it comes back to what you're saying, like not making tax the center of everything. It is one important aspect, but perhaps not the central aspect of why you choose where you want to live, relocate, and what kind of life you want to build by design, essentially. Yeah. I think I've discussed this in countless videos. My personal opinion is, we've obviously talked about there are ways you can optimize your taxes in Spain, but as you've said, there are countries that are much more tax efficient than Spain, like the UAE, like Cyprus, for example. But as you said yourself, Dubai is not for everyone. I think Dubai is great. I've been there a number of times. I think with a specific idea of what they want out of life, for them to really enjoy Dubai is my opinion as well. But that's
any country for that matter. You could easily pay low taxes in Monaco as long as you got £5 million spare.
Yeah, exactly. Great, Simon. This was a great discussion. Thank you so much for your time. Reminder for the viewers as well that Simon is available for tax consultations, whether it's UK Spain, US Spain. We'll leave his link in the video description so you can reach out for a consultation with him.
Great. Thank you ever so much for having me on again.
All right, guys. So I hope you enjoyed that video and found it useful. Leave a comment and let me know if you've been through some of the situations we've mentioned in this video. I'd be really interested to hear what the outcome was for you. And if you like this video and you want to see more about administrative matters, taxation, and living in Spain, then be sure to check out these two videos here. So next time, I'll see you on the next one. And let's get this money.